Millions tuned in for jokes. Then one quiet sentence from Keanu froze the room. On live TV, Oprah laughs off his mystic vibe, but his reply turns laughter into silence and forces a choice: mock belief or face what it demands. Then, a voice from the audience rises, and what follows was never meant for television. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights in Studio 3 blaze so bright, they almost erase the edges of the room. The countdown clock above the cameras blinked its final red digits. 10 minutes to air. Technicians darted between cables and monitors like a well-rehearsed ballet. A floor director shouted cues over the hum of the warm-up comic working the crowd. Hundreds of audience members leaned forward, laughing too loud, eager to become part of the moment that might show up on social media by morning. Every sound, every light cue, every smirk on the monitor was timed to perfection. The Oprah Winfrey Show didn't just start, it ignited. Behind the curtain, Keanu Reeves stood in the dim calm just outside the spotlight. The contrast suited him: black suit, scuffed boots, and the kind of stillness that made noise unnecessary. He wasn't scrolling through a phone or checking his reflection in the dressing mirror. He was watching the crew move with quiet fascination, like a man who still found wonder in ordinary people doing extraordinary things. When a nervous production assistant fumbled a bottle of water near him, Keanu caught it mid-air and smiled gently. "You're doing great," he said, handing it back as if he were passing confidence itself. The young man blushed, whispering thanks before disappearing toward the stage. A few feet away, Oprah adjusted her note cards beneath the harsh ring of lights. Her purple dress shimmered softly under the heat. She read over her introduction line again, practicing the cadence. The producers' voices crackled through her earpiece, fine-tuning the energy for the opening. "Keep it light, Oprah," one said. "Memes, Matrix nostalgia, maybe a joke about John Wick. Don't go too deep tonight, we need viral clips." She smiled automatically, but part of her resisted. She'd interviewed presidents, grieving mothers, poets, and moguls. She could sense when a guest carried more beneath the surface, and Keanu Reeves was never what the world thought he was. In the audience, two strangers waited, unaware that they'd soon witness something unforgettable. Tyler, a 20-year-old college vlogger with restless eyes, had his phone raised, ready to record every punchline. He'd grown up on internet culture. He wanted laughs, memes, and maybe a clip to post by evening. 2 rows behind him sat Reverend Samuel Ellis, a retired pastor in a modest gray suit. His hands rested on his lap, worn and steady. A friend had given him the ticket. He had almost declined, but something about the guest list drew him in. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps something else. From the wings, Keanu glanced once toward the glowing on-air sign. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, not to rehearse a line, but to steady his spirit. Out there, laughter would be easy. Meaning would be harder, and yet that was what he had promised himself he would bring. The floor director lifted his clipboard like a conductor's baton. "We're live in 5. The countdown began. 4, 3, 2, 1. The orchestra swelled, the curtain lifted, and the night began. The opening theme thundered through the studio, shaking the walls with applause. Oprah stepped into the light, her smile radiant, her energy commanding the room like a maestro. "Welcome, everyone," she called out, and the crowd roared back, hanging on every syllable. She'd done this thousands of times, but tonight there was a flicker of curiosity behind her practiced warmth. Somewhere in her intuition, she could already sense that this would not be an ordinary conversation. Behind the camera, producers breathed in relief. The opening always mattered: the rhythm, the charm, the first connection with millions of viewers watching from their homes. Every gesture, every note of laughter carried value. And Oprah was a master. Yet as she greeted the audience, her mind flicked to the man standing just beyond the light. Keanu Reeves, the enigma of Hollywood. A man whose kindness had become legend, and whose silence only made the world listen more. She wondered what it would take to make him open up beyond the polite surface the public adored. Backstage, Keanu listened to the muffled laughter spilling through the curtain. He could have used the moment to psych himself up, but that was never his way. Instead, he adjusted his cuffs, glanced toward a dusty lighting rig, and whispered a quiet thank you to no one in particular, perhaps to something beyond himself. He didn't pray for success. He prayed for truth. The difference mattered to him. In the audience, Tyler laughed louder than most, hoping to appear in the camera sweep. He nudged the friend beside him, whispering, "I bet she makes him talk about the internet memes." His friend nodded, smirking. That's what everyone expected, a light segment. Viral-worthy jokes about Keanu the Saint, maybe a funny story about motorcycles. None of them could have predicted how wrong they were. Reverend Ellis sat still as the show began, eyes steady on the empty guest chair. He had no phone out, no camera ready. He simply watched. Decades of preaching had taught him that moments of real truth rarely announce themselves. They arrived quietly, disguised as conversation. Something about tonight felt like that, a tremor beneath the surface of entertainment. In Oprah's earpiece, a producer whispered, "After the intro, move straight to the meme joke. Play it fun." She nodded out of habit, but her eyes stayed on the monitor, showing Keanu waiting in the wings. There was something about the way he stood, not stiff, not guarded, just present, unhurried. It was disarming. Most stars were restless before air, pacing, adjusting makeup, running talking points. Keanu looked like a man, ready for something deeper than promotion. As the applause softened, Oprah turned slightly toward camera 2. "Tonight," she announced, "we welcome one of the most beloved, mysterious figures in Hollywood. He's known for his humility, his intensity, and let's admit it, an endless list of internet jokes that just won't stop." The crowd erupted again. The cue light blinked. "Please welcome Keanu Reeves." Backstage, Keanu took a breath and stepped forward into the blaze of white light. The light struck him like a sunrise. For a second, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Keanu walked calmly toward Oprah, the applause rolling in waves around him. There was no swagger in his stride, only quiet confidence. He shook her hand with a gentle nod, then offered a small wave to the audience, the faintest smile curving his lips. His presence didn't demand attention, it invited it. Oprah motioned for him to sit, and as he did, she felt something unusual in the air. The cameras adjusted, audience settled, and the energy shifted from excitement to curiosity. Keanu sat with an easy posture, hands loosely clasped, eyes attentive. For a man known for his mystery, he radiated calm openness. It wasn't performance, it was presence. Even the crew noticed. A camera operator whispered, "He's so still." The sound tech replied softly, like he's actually listening to the room. The first few minutes went exactly as planned. Oprah charmed the crowd, reminisced about his classic roles, and teased him about fan devotion. He responded with the same modest humor that had made him beloved for decades. The laughter came easy, predictable, rhythmic, safe. But beneath it, there was something slower building, something that didn't fit the script. Between segments, Oprah's producer murmured in her ear, "Keep it breezy, don't lose the fun tone." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on Keanu. The way he spoke was different, careful, reflective, as if every word had weight. When she asked about fame, he didn't pivot to a witty anecdote. He said, "Fame isn't something you hold, it's something you learn to carry." The crowd quieted for a second before laughing again, unsure if it was meant to be funny. Tyler felt the hesitation too. He had expected another easy celebrity chat, but the air was changing almost imperceptibly. He lowered his phone just a little, curiosity creeping in where irony had been. Behind him, Reverend Ellis leaned forward, his lined face calm but alert. He sensed a story beginning, not about movies, but about something deeper. A story that would divide the room before it united it. In the control booth, the director tapped a pen against the desk, uneasy. Everything looked perfect on screen. But something in the pacing wasn't typical talk show energy. "He's slowing her rhythm," the floor manager muttered. "Yeah," the director replied, "and the crowd's following him instead of her." Oprah straightened slightly, feeling that subtle power shift. Her instincts honed over decades recognized it instantly. This was one of those rare moments when a guest didn't play along but played true. It could be magic or chaos, depending on how she handled it. In her ear, another whisper came. "Stick to the memes, Oprah. Keep it viral." She smiled faintly, then looked at Keanu's calm expression and made a silent decision. The cards on her lap suddenly felt unnecessary. She placed them face down beside her chair and looked him in the eye. "Let's talk about something real," she said softly, and the cameras kept rolling. The applause still echoed when Oprah leaned forward with her trademark warmth. "Keanu Reeves, everyone. The man who makes kindness look effortless." The audience erupted again, and Keanu dipped his head modestly, his quiet smile deepening just enough to thank without words. When the noise finally softened, Oprah began the familiar rhythm, the opening volley of a talk show where laughter was currency. "I've got to say," she said, "you're the only movie star I know who rides the subway and tips waiters like you're the one waiting tables." The crowd laughed, eager to join in the joke. Keanu smiled. "I think everyone deserves a little kindness, and the subway moves faster than most cars in LA." That earned another round of laughter, softer this time, the kind that carried admiration beneath amusement. Oprah grinned. "You hear that, folks? A humble man who knows traffic is the great equalizer." She paused, waiting for the audience to settle before continuing. "But come on, Keanu, let's be honest. You've become this internet legend, this symbol of quiet mystery. People call you a monk in a black suit. They say you meditate between takes. Do you?" The audience chuckled again, feeding off Oprah's teasing tone. She leaned back with playful confidence, crossing one leg over the other. "Tell me, do you pray to prepare for those death-defying stunts, or is that just Hollywood folklore?" It was meant as humor, an easy setup for another laugh. But Keanu's expression didn't shift toward comedy. He smiled gently, almost sadly, as if the question touched something he rarely brought into the public eye. His voice, when it came, was calm but carried weight. "I pray because I need grace more than good luck." The sound in the studio changed. It wasn't silence, not yet. It was a collective pause, the small, sharp inhale of hundreds of people unsure how to react. Oprah's smile froze halfway. The crowd, conditioned for laughter, waited for the punchline that never came. Then it happened. The laughter that had been ready to spill out faltered, collided with the sincerity of his tone, and dissolved. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward at first. It was reverent, uncertain, the hush that happens when truth sneaks into a room meant for entertainment. Oprah blinked once, her composure slipping just slightly. She gave a small laugh, practiced, but not cruel, the reflex of a professional caught off guard. "Well," she said lightly, "that's one way to keep from breaking bones." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but even those sounded hesitant, unsure whether it was safe to laugh again. The cameraman glanced toward the director for confirmation, uncertain if he should push in for a close-up or cut to the crowd. The energy had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Keanu simply smiled again, neither defensive nor embarrassed, letting the silence stand. The light reflected softly in his eyes, steady as stone. Somewhere in the control booth, a producer whispered, "Did he just say grace?" Oprah felt the weight of the moment before the audience did. She had seen silence before, usually after tears, never after laughter. The rhythm of the show had cracked, and yet there was something about the way Keanu sat there, unbothered by the pause, that made her hesitate to force it back on track. His calm wasn't awkward. It was grounding. It was as if the noise of show business couldn't reach him. She cleared her throat lightly and tried to find the middle ground. "That's a very beautiful answer," she said, her voice softening. "But I have to ask, do you really mean that? Like, actually pray before a scene?" Her tone was half teasing, half genuinely curious. She wasn't sure which side she was speaking from anymore. Keanu nodded once. "Yes," he said simply. "I pray before most things, not just stunts." The audience shifted. Some smiled faintly, others leaned in, drawn to the quiet confidence in his tone. He wasn't defensive, and he wasn't preaching. He was just telling the truth. "It's not about superstition," he continued. "It's about remembering that I'm small in a big story, and that everything I do, even on a set like this, affects someone else." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was heavy, expectant, as if the crowd could sense something meaningful emerging. Oprah's eyes flickered toward the teleprompter, then back to Keanu. The next question was supposed to be about his upcoming movie, but suddenly that felt shallow. She set the card down again and leaned closer. "You know," she said, choosing her words carefully, "you're one of the few actors people describe as almost spiritual, but you've never really talked about it. Why now?" Keanu hesitated, a long pause that made the audience hold their breath. "Because I stopped hiding," he said quietly. "For a long time, I thought silence was humility. But maybe silence can also be fear." Oprah blinked, caught off guard again. The crowd murmured softly, unsure how to respond. The producers in the control room exchanged glances, one of them mouthing, "What's happening?" Keanu looked out at the audience, his gaze resting briefly on the first few rows, where Tyler sat frozen with his phone still raised. "We all believe in something," Keanu said. "Even disbelief is belief in disguise." The young vlogger lowered his phone, suddenly aware of the intimacy in the room. Reverend Ellis in the second row bowed his head slightly, as though silently agreeing. Oprah gave a small, slow nod. "That's quite a perspective," she said. "You may be changing the tone of my entire show tonight." Keanu smiled faintly, almost apologetically. Maybe the tone needed a rest. A few laughs broke through, gentle this time. Not mocking, relieved. Almost. The tension loosened, just enough to breathe. But the change lingered. What had started as late-night banter was now something else entirely, something real. For a moment, no one spoke. Oprah sat back slightly, studying him, the cards in her lap forgotten. She could feel the eyes of the crew waiting for her to steer it back towards safety, but she didn't. Something about Keanu's tone had shifted the entire air of the studio. This wasn't a segment anymore, it was a crossroads between television and truth. She smiled gently, trying to recover her rhythm. "Well, you certainly have a way of surprising people," she said. "Most stars come here to promote a movie. You come here to promote peace." Keanu chuckled softly. "Peace is harder to find than a blockbuster." The audience laughed, grateful for the release. But under the humor, his sincerity still pulsed. The words weren't rehearsed. They came from a place too genuine to be scripted. Even Oprah, the master of guiding interviews, found herself lowering her voice, mirroring his calm. "You've been through a lot," she said. "Loss, fame, the pressure of being the man everyone calls the internet's favorite human. And yet, you still sound grounded. What keeps you that way?" Keanu looked down for a moment. The kind of pause that felt like reflection, not delay. "Gratitude," he said. "And grace. I try to remember that neither are earned. They're given." Someone in the back of the audience clapped once, softly, before realizing how quiet the room was. The rest of the audience followed with gentle applause. Not the thunderous kind that fills segments, but something smaller, more human. Oprah felt a chill run through her arms. She had been in television long enough to know when something authentic reached people in real time. This was one of those moments. In her earpiece, a voice broke the spell. "Cut to promo soon. We're drifting too serious." She didn't answer. For the first time that night, she ignored the control booth. Instead, she smiled. "Keanu, you've just made millions of people stop scrolling for a moment." He met her gaze and said quietly, "Sometimes that's all grace needs, a moment to be noticed." For several beats, there was nothing but stillness. Even Tyler, who had come for a quick viral clip, found himself lowering his phone completely. Reverend Ellis's eyes glistened with recognition, sensing that a truth was landing somewhere it hadn't before. Oprah inhaled slowly and turned to the camera. "Well," she said softly, "I think that's a good reminder for all of us." The red light above the lens blinked, signaling the segment break. But instead of cutting to commercial, the show stayed live for a few extra seconds, long enough for viewers at home to feel the same hush that filled the studio. And in that silence, the narrator's voice would later add, "Calm and steady." If stories about purpose resonate with you, subscribe and share this moment with someone who needs hope. The control room buzzed with quiet urgency. Monitors flickered in a row, showing split-screen shots of Oprah, Keanu, and the wide crowd. The producer, headset pressed tight against his ear, gave brisk instructions. "Roll the montage in 10. We need to lighten this back up." On the main monitor, a pre-edited video was cued clips of Keanu's fight choreography from the John Wick films. Slow-motion shots of him training with stunt teams, laughing with fans on the street, even a charity clip from a hospital visit. The segment was designed to recapture momentum, to remind viewers why they loved him. But on stage, something had shifted. The plan no longer fit the room. Oprah had felt it since the moment Keanu said the word grace. The script was slipping away from her fingertips, replaced by a kind of living energy that couldn't be controlled by cue cards or timing lights. Still, habit guided her. As the applause faded from the last segment, she lifted her hand in a smooth gesture and said, "We've got something special for everyone watching at home. A quick look at what makes our guest one of the most beloved action stars in the world." The monitor behind them lit up. The audience clapped automatically as the reel began. Explosions, spinning kicks, gunfire choreographed like ballet. Keanu's younger face filled the screen, his eyes intense, his body in motion. The crowd cheered, relieved by the return to something familiar. Even the control room relaxed. "Good," the producer murmured. "Keep this tempo. After this, go back to jokes." But when the montage ended and the lights refocused on stage, Keanu's demeanor hadn't changed. He smiled at the applause, nodded in appreciation, but stayed grounded, centered. Oprah leaned in with her cue line. "You make all that look easy. Tell me, has a stunt ever gone wrong?" The question was harmless, pre-approved. It was supposed to lead into a funny story about bruises, maybe a fall, something to get people laughing again. Keanu took a small breath before answering. "Sure," he said. "Plenty of times. I've been thrown into walls, hit by cables, missed landings. Pain is part of the process." He smiled, and the audience chuckled softly. Then, without a change in tone, he added, "But the worst injuries aren't physical. They happen when you start believing your worth depends on getting it right the first time." The laughter stopped almost instantly. Oprah blinked, surprised by the direction. She looked at her next card, then back at him. "That's a powerful way to see it," she said slowly. Keanu nodded, eyes gentle but unwavering. "It took me years to understand that a broken bone heals faster than a broken purpose." And just like that, the entire plan unraveled. The crowd grew quiet again. In the control room, the producer froze, headset still in place. What did he just say? In the control booth, the producer rubbed his temples. "We're losing rhythm," he muttered. "Oprah needs to steer back." The assistant director nodded nervously, eyes locked on the main monitor. "But look at that feed," he whispered. "People aren't restless, they're still." It was true. On every camera angle, the audience sat motionless, their faces attentive, not bored. What was happening on stage didn't feel like television anymore. It felt like something unfiltered, something raw. Oprah sensed it too. For years, she had trusted her intuition more than any script. She glanced down at her cue cards, 3 questions highlighted in yellow about stunt safety, movie injuries, and how it feels to be a Hollywood badass. They suddenly looked childish. She picked up the top card, turned it over, and quietly slid it under her chair. When she looked back up, her tone had changed. "Keanu," she said softly, "you've done things most people only dream of. You've risked your body, your reputation, your peace. But when you talk about worth, it sounds like you're describing something deeper than success." Keanu's expression didn't shift, but his voice carried warmth that reached the back row. "I've met a lot of people who think they're climbing toward happiness," he said. "But sometimes, when you get to the top, you realize you've been climbing the wrong mountain." The line struck like a quiet thunder. Reverend Ellis exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing not in disapproval, but recognition. Tyler, still holding his phone half raised, mouthed the sentence to himself, as if committing it to memory. The audience murmured faintly, a ripple of thought instead of applause. In the control booth, the producer pointed at the floor director. "We need a reset. Cue Oprah for something lighter." Down on the floor, the director gestured with both hands upward motions, the signal for energy. Oprah caught the cue out of the corner of her eye, but ignored it. She stayed locked on Keanu. He went on, his words simple but resonant. "There was a time," he said, "when every mistake felt like proof that I didn't deserve good things. That's a dangerous lie. You start living to prove your value instead of to share it." Oprah's hand went to her chest unconsciously. Her voice came out almost in a whisper. "And you stopped believing that?" "I'm still learning," Keanu replied. "But every time I fail, I remember that my value didn't vanish. It just got quieter." A deep silence filled the room again. Not the dead kind, but the alive kind, where people listen with both mind and heart. In that moment, Oprah forgot about camera angles and timing. She was simply a woman listening to a man tell the truth. The floor director gave another hand signal from behind the cameras, more urgent this time, tapping his wrist to remind Oprah of the ticking clock. Commercial break overdue. Segment pacing gone. She glanced toward him but didn't move. Something inside, her deeper than training, knew that interrupting now would feel like slamming a door in the middle of prayer. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, thoughtful but never theatrical. "Movies teach you how to take a punch," he said quietly. "But life teaches you how to stand up when no one's filming." The audience didn't move. You could almost hear the hum of the lights overhead. Tyler, who had come for laughs, found himself gripping the edge of his seat. His phone rested in his lap now, forgotten, the red recording light still glowing. Behind him, Reverend Ellis clasped his hands tighter, his lips moving in a silent amen. Oprah took a small breath, steady but heavy with emotion. "That's a lesson a lot of people need right now," she said softly. "You talk about worth and grace like they're muscles we're supposed to train." Keanu nodded once. "Maybe they are," he said. "The more you use them, the stronger they get. But when you stop practicing gratitude or forgiveness, they atrophy. And when that happens, pride or fear takes their place." She sat still, letting his words breathe. No one in the room realized how many millions were watching at home, sensing that this wasn't a typical talk show exchange. Even the control room had gone silent, save for the low hum of the machines. The producer lowered his headset slightly, staring at the live feed, whispering to himself, "Don't cut. Just let it run." Keanu continued, his voice calm but firm. "We've built an industry where everything depends on applause. But I've learned that the quiet after applause is where you find out who you really are." The sentence hung there, suspended in the air like something sacred. Oprah smiled faintly, her eyes glistening under the studio lights. "That's the first time I've heard someone turn silence into wisdom," she said. Keanu shrugged lightly. "Maybe silence isn't empty," he said. "Maybe it's full of answers we don't want to hear yet." The crowd sighed, almost in unison. The sound of hundreds of people exhaling what they didn't realize they'd been holding. Oprah leaned forward again, elbows resting on her knees. "You know, Keanu," she said, "I think you just changed the tone of television tonight." He smiled, not triumphant, just grateful. "That's not a bad thing," he replied. "Sometimes a good conversation needs less noise." From behind the cameras, the director finally relaxed his arms, lowering his clipboard. The clock had long passed its cue, but nobody cared. The show had slipped out of production mode and into something human, fragile and true. And though no one said it aloud, Every person in the room understood that something in them had shifted too. The applause had faded to a soft murmur. The audience wasn't restless anymore. They were attentive, leaning into every word. Oprah sat forward in her chair, elbows resting lightly on her knees, the warmth in her tone shifting from host to human. "You know," she began, "people see you as this symbol of calm, this stoic figure. I've read articles calling you the last real gentleman in Hollywood." She smiled faintly. "Is that just discipline, or is it belief?" Keanu took a moment before answering. He looked down at his hands, as though searching for words that matched the weight of what he meant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but clear. "Discipline is how I move through the day," he said. "Belief is why I move at all." The audience grew still. The line hit differently, not like a quote, but like something lived. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, the sound of people processing rather than reacting. Oprah tilted her head, intrigued, caught between the rhythm of television and the pull of something deeper. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "But what do you mean by belief? Everyone believes in something, right?" Keanu's eyes met hers. There was no tension, no defensiveness, only patience. "That's true," he said. "But I've learned that believing in something isn't the same as knowing why you believe. I spent years chasing success, relationships, purpose. I thought if I stayed disciplined enough, I could fill the silence. But belief gives meaning to discipline. It tells you what the effort is for." The control room fell silent. Even through the thick studio glass, the producers could sense the shift. The segment had drifted into territory no one planned for, yet no one dared interrupt. Oprah leaned back slightly, considering him. "So," she said with her characteristic thoughtfulness, "you're saying discipline gets you moving, but belief gives you direction?" Keanu nodded. "Something like that. Discipline helps you show up. Belief reminds you why it matters that you did." The audience broke into soft applause, not the roaring kind meant for jokes or dramatic moments. Something quieter, almost reverent. Tyler, still holding his phone, lowered it a few inches. His grin was gone. He'd come for a celebrity interview, but now it felt like he was witnessing a confession. Oprah smiled at the reaction, but pressed gently onward. "You know, a lot of people watching tonight come from all kinds of backgrounds, different faiths, different experiences. Do you think belief always looks the same for everyone?" Keanu paused again, choosing his words like someone carrying glass through a crowd. "No," he said finally, "but I think truth has a shape. We may see it from different sides, but it's still one thing." The room went quiet again. Even the laugh sign flickered above the audience, waiting for a cue that never came. Oprah took in his words with a subtle lift of an eyebrow. It wasn't the kind of answer that satisfied curiosity, it deepened it. She had interviewed philosophers, spiritual teachers, and movie stars who pretended to be both, but Keanu's stillness was different. He wasn't performing. He was revealing, and the audience could feel the difference. "So," she said after a beat, "when you say truth has a shape, do you mean faith is absolute? Or is it something that changes as we change?" Her tone was gentle, but she was steering carefully, aware that millions were listening. Keanu smiled slightly, understanding the care in her phrasing. "I think faith grows, but truth doesn't shift with us," he said. "The way I see it, belief isn't about bending truth to fit our comfort. It's about letting truth shape us, even when it hurts." The crowd grew quieter, sensing that this was no longer a conversation about religion but about integrity. Oprah nodded thoughtfully, leaning into the weight of his words. "That's hard for people," she said. "We live in a world where everyone wants to be right all the time." Keanu's expression softened. "That's the trap, isn't it? We confuse being right with being whole. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can say is, 'I don't know, but I'm listening.'" A ripple went through the audience. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. Tyler glanced around, unsure what was happening, but something inside him, something deeper than cynicism, had started to wake up. His phone lowered another inch. In the control booth, the The producer gestured toward the laugh sign again, hoping to lift the mood. The bright red letters flickered above the crowd, but nobody reacted, not even a forced chuckle. The studio had entered a different rhythm now, slower and more intimate, and everyone knew it. Oprah tried to gently nudge the tone back to center. "You know," she said, smiling softly, "I like to think there are many paths to meaning. People find peace in different ways, in art, in kindness, in family, in service." Keanu nodded respectfully. "I agree," he said. "Kindness, service, love, those are the fruits of belief. But for me, they're not the belief itself." He paused, his voice lowering. "I believe in a living God, not an idea, a relationship." The words landed like a slow tide washing over the room. The audience froze, unsure how to react. No applause, no laughter, just listening. Oprah blinked, her usual composure softening into something more personal. "A relationship," she repeated quietly, testing the weight of the phrase. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back at her. "Yes," he said, "because you can admire an idea, but only love can change you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The studio air had changed completely. The laughter that usually punctuated every minute of a talk show had vanished, replaced by a stillness that almost hummed. Even, the lights felt softer somehow, less like spotlights and more like candles. Oprah sat with her fingers folded. No longer the interviewer, but a participant in a conversation she hadn't expected. "That's a powerful statement," she said finally. "A living God. That's not something we hear often on this stage." She smiled gently, not mocking, just curious. "You know, some people might say that sounds exclusive, that there are so many ways to connect with the divine, and maybe all of them are valid. What would you say to that?" Keanu nodded slowly, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp with sincerity. "I think love never excludes," he said, "but truth still has a heartbeat. For me, that heartbeat is personal. I don't need everyone to believe what I believe. I just need to live in a way that makes people feel seen." The audience listened closely, drawn in by the quiet conviction of his tone. He wasn't trying to persuade anyone. He was simply bearing witness. Even Tyler, who had come for internet gold, now found himself oddly moved. He thought of his mother, who used to pray for him before school, and how he'd rolled his eyes every time. For the first time in years, he missed her voice. Reverend Ellis in the second row sat straighter. His eyes softened as he watched Keanu speak with humility that required no pulpit. This was what faith looked like when it wasn't for show, gentle, unguarded, alive. Oprah leaned forward slightly, her tone almost tender. "You talk about God as someone you know, not just believe in. That's unusual in Hollywood." Keanu gave a small smile. "Maybe. But I think everyone, deep down, wants to be known. We can fill our lives with noise and motion, but at the end of the day, the soul still whispers for connection. That's what belief gives me, a connection that doesn't depend on applause." A faint murmur rippled through the room, not of disapproval, but of understanding. The laugh sign above the audience flickered again, but no one responded. The show had entered an entirely different space, one where silence was louder than sound. Oprah's eyes softened. "You realize," she said, "that in a world where everyone's trying to go viral, you just made stillness go viral." Keanu chuckled quietly. "Then maybe the world needs more of it." The audience smiled with him, not laughing but breathing in relief. There was something healing in the moment, an unspoken agreement that they had all just shared something rare. For a few beats, Oprah said nothing. She simply looked at him, the flicker of admiration crossing her face. Then she nodded once, slowly. "Let's keep going," she said quietly. "I think people need to hear the rest of this." Oprah had learned over decades that when tension built too thick, humor could release it like air from a balloon. She smiled warmly, trying to lighten the mood without breaking its depth. "You're making faith sound noble, Keanu," she said with an easy laugh. But at this point, people might start calling you the monk of Hollywood." The audience chuckled softly, grateful for a familiar tone, but Keanu didn't immediately answer. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that understood why the joke existed, and also why it no longer worked. "I'm far from a monk," he said gently. "I'm someone who fails a lot, and asks for forgiveness a lot." The sentence hit the air like a small earthquake. There was no script in it, no polish, just honesty, raw and disarming. The crowd shifted in their seats, sensing something real beneath the simplicity. A few people began to clap instinctively, unsure what else to do. It started softly, 2 or 3 hands, and then spread to a few more, before fading as quickly as it had begun. The applause felt too small for what he had just said. Oprah's eyes softened. Her instinct told her to move forward, to keep the momentum alive. But the producer's voice crackled in her earpiece, urgent. "Take the break. We're over time. Cue the ad roll." She hesitated. The part of her that had built an empire from empathy knew this wasn't the moment to sell detergent. She ignored the cue and leaned forward instead. "Tell me," she said quietly, "when did that matter most?" Keanu looked down for a moment, elbows resting on his knees, fingers pressed together like he was gathering strength. When he finally looked up, the expression in his eyes had changed, less composed, more human. "When a night felt darker than the room we're in right now." The audience fell completely still. Oprah didn't speak. The control room froze, unsure if they should cut the feed. Tyler, who had once been recording, with restless enthusiasm, lowered his phone completely. Even Reverend Ellis, still and watchful, closed his eyes briefly, as if in prayer. Keanu didn't elaborate yet. He simply let the words breathe, the silence itself becoming a form of respect. Oprah waited, trusting that the next sentence would come when it was ready. She'd seen actors use pauses for drama. This wasn't that. This was the weight of truth, being carried carefully into the open. "Finally," he said softly, "I used to think success would make the pain smaller, but it doesn't. It just gives it nicer furniture." The room didn't move. Not one camera, not one cough. For the first time in years, Oprah Winfrey had no idea what her next question would be. Oprah's lips parted slightly, the weight of his words pressing against her trained composure. She had guided thousands of guests through painful truths, but something about Keanu's quiet vulnerability reached beyond the safety of interview etiquette. She leaned forward, voice low and steady. "What do you mean by that?" Keanu exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed somewhere just past the camera lights. "Pain doesn't care about fame," he said. "You can decorate it, disguise it, drown it in work, but it waits. And sometimes, when everything is quiet, it sits next to you, like an old friend you thought you'd buried." The air in the studio thickened. You could almost feel hearts slowing to match the rhythm of his voice. Oprah's instincts told her to protect him, to step in and guide the tone back towards safety, but she didn't. Something in her, something maternal, perhaps spiritual, knew this was where truth lived. He continued quietly. "I had a night once where I realized I wasn't just tired, I was empty. The kind of empty that can't be fixed by applause. I remember sitting in a dark room, surrounded by everything I thought I'd ever wanted, and feeling like I had nothing left to give. That's when I asked for help, not from the world, but from the one who sees through it." A murmur spread through the audience. The rawness in his tone didn't invite pity, it invited reflection. Reverend Ellis's eyes glistened. Tyler blinked rapidly, caught between disbelief and respect. He'd seen hundreds of interviews online, but none like this. Oprah shifted, barely breathing. "You're talking about faith again," she said softly. "But this time it sounds like rescue." Keanu nodded. "It was. I didn't see light that night. Not right away. But I stopped pretending I didn't need it." He paused, letting the silence expand again. "People think strength is about never breaking. I think real strength is about breaking and still choosing to stand up." A collective sigh rippled through the crowd. It wasn't an applause moment. It was a communion moment, the kind that binds strangers without them realizing it. Oprah's hand rested against her heart, her eyes moist but steady. In the control booth, the producer wiped his face with a handkerchief and muttered to no one, "We can't cut to commercial after that." Another technician whispered back, "Then don't." Oprah leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keanu, if you could talk to that version of yourself, the man sitting in the dark, what would you say?" Keanu looked straight into the camera, his tone soft but firm. "I'd tell him the light never left. He just stopped looking toward it." The audience didn't clap. They couldn't. The silence felt sacred. Oprah felt the lump rising in her throat, but she held it back, determined to let the moment unfold naturally. Years of practice had taught her how to balance control and vulnerability. Yet what Keanu said next tipped that balance completely. "You know," he said softly, "I think the hardest thing about forgiveness isn't asking for it. It's believing you deserve it once it's given." The audience stirred, a quiet, collective reaction like wind, moving through leaves. A few heads bowed. The laugh cue light blinked above them again, unnoticed and useless. The studio wasn't laughing anymore, it was listening. Oprah tilted her head slightly. "You talk about failure and forgiveness as if they're part of your daily routine," she said. "Do you really think it's that simple? That we can just start over every time we fall?" Keanu smiled, a weary but sincere smile. "It's not simple," he said. "But it's possible. I fail all the time. I get impatient, I withdraw, I make assumptions about people I should have loved better. But every morning, I wake up and remember that grace resets the day. That's what makes life bearable, the chance to try again." A hush fell again. Even the steady hum of the stage equipment seemed to fade. Tyler's heart thudded in his chest, though he couldn't explain why. Reverend Ellis whispered under his breath, "Yes, Lord," and a few audience members glanced toward him as if echoing the same silent prayer. Oprah's tone softened further. "That's not something we often hear from actors," she said. "Most people talk about reinvention. You're talking about repentance." Keanu chuckled lightly. "Maybe they're the same thing," he said. "One is changing your name. The other is changing your heart." A few soft laughs slipped through the room, gentle and human. Oprah smiled, but didn't interrupt. She could feel it now. This was no longer her show. It was Keanu's moment, and by extension, everyone's. The cameras were still rolling, but the conversation had transcended television. He looked down again, fingers tracing the edge of his chair. "The night I mentioned," he said quietly, "wasn't about fame. It was about meaning. I realized that even good people can lose sight of why they're here. I asked for help that night, and I didn't hear a voice. I just felt peace, a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. That's how I knew someone was listening." Oprah nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. And that's when the room wasn't dark anymore. Keanu smiled. "Exactly." No one moved for several seconds. The crew didn't shout for break. The audience didn't clap. For once, television had forgotten to perform and remembered how to feel. Oprah didn't need to say anything. The entire studio seemed to be waiting for Keanu to continue, as if everyone sensed he wasn't done yet. The stillness around him wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was reverence. He took a breath, slow and thoughtful, eyes distant yet focused, as though replaying memories that were still tender. "There was a time," he began quietly, "when everything was loud. I don't mean the cameras or the fans, I mean inside. The applause would fade, but the noise in my head wouldn't. I'd walk into a crowd and feel completely invisible. I'd smile, I'd sign, I'd pretend to be fine. But when the lights went off, there was this ache that never really left." The words carried no bitterness, just weary honesty. The crowd leaned closer. Somewhere backstage, a monitor hummed faintly, but no one moved to adjust it. Oprah's hand rested against her chin. Her expression softened by something beyond professionalism. Keanu continued. "There was one night I remember more clearly than most. I was filming overseas. The schedule was brutal. Different cities, different faces, The same routine. After one of the rap parties, I went back to my hotel. I turned on the light, looked at the reflection in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the man staring back. He paused. He looked tired, not from work, but from pretending it all meant something. A hush swept across the audience. Even Tyler, who had been recording on autopilot, slowly lowered his phone to his lap. The screen was still glowing, capturing everything: the dim set, the still cameras, the unspoken emotions painted across faces. "I sat on that hotel floor," Keanu said, his voice steady but low. "There was a cup of coffee gone cold beside me, the kind you forget you've made. I remember thinking, how can a life so full feel this empty?" Oprah inhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. "What did you do?" she asked. "I asked for help," he said. "Not from an audience. Not from another job. From God." The statement fell into the room like a stone into still water, rippling out in silence that felt both heavy and holy. "I didn't ask for fame, or peace, or even understanding," he went on. "I just said, if you're there, I can't do this alone anymore." And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. It wasn't a miracle moment. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that felt alive. A boom operator standing near the stage blinked rapidly, his hand trembling slightly as he wiped a tear on his sleeve. The camera operators stayed frozen on their marks, aware that something rare was happening. Reverend Ellis, sitting a few rows back, nodded once. He didn't quote scripture. He didn't need to. The moment spoke its own. For a moment, the studio lights seemed softer, like they dimmed themselves out of respect. Oprah sat completely still, elbows on her knees, hands clasped in quiet attention. She had heard countless stories of fame, heartbreak, and loss, but Keanu's tone wasn't confessional. It was contemplative, like a man finally unburdening something he'd carried too long. "I've lost people," he said slowly. "Friends, family, love I thought would last forever. And every time, the world expected me to move on quickly, because that's what we do in this business. We turn pain into a quote, grief into a soundbite. But grief doesn't work on a timeline. It lingers in small ways. The chair that stays empty, the laugh you still wait to hear." He paused, eyes glistening but steady. "I remember once walking home from a set at 3 a.m. The street was empty, and I could hear my own footsteps echoing. I realized I was surrounded by lights but walking in darkness. The studio was silent. The cameras whirred faintly, but no one noticed. The control room, which usually buzzed with chatter and cues, had fallen into stunned quiet. The floor director lowered his hand, forgetting his own job for a moment. Keanu went on, his voice calm but weighted. "That was the night I stopped pretending I was fine. I stopped trying to fill the silence with noise. I just let it be silent. And in that silence, I felt something. Not comfort exactly, but a reminder that I wasn't meant to carry everything alone." Reverend Ellis tilted his head back, eyes closed, as though the words were familiar scripture spoken in a new tongue. Tyler sat frozen, his phone still recording but forgotten in his hand. The blue glow lit his stunned expression as Keanu's honesty cut through his cynicism. "I didn't find faith because life was easy," Keanu continued. "I found it because I had nothing left but faith. When you hit the edge, when you've tried everything else, there's something in the human heart that reaches out. I think that's God's way of saying, I'm still here. You've just been looking in the wrong direction." A quiet sniffle came from somewhere in the audience. Oprah blinked, her eyes shining but clear. "That kind of vulnerability," she said softly. "Most people spend their lives avoiding it." Keanu nodded. "It's hard to face yourself without distraction, but it's also the only place you really find out who you are." Every person in the studio seemed to breathe at the same time, slow and synchronized, as if they'd all been holding their breath for the last few minutes. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of thought, pain, and the quiet miracle of connection that words alone rarely create. Oprah leaned back slightly, absorbing the moment. She could feel it, the entire room breathing with him, hearts sinking to the same rhythm. She had seen actors perform vulnerability, But this was something else entirely. There was no act in his voice. Only truth, stripped bare. Keanu clasped his hands together, gaze distant but present. People think strength means carrying everything alone, he said. But I've learned it's the opposite. Real strength is knowing when you can't. He took a slow breath. For years I kept everything inside. Every fear, every loss, every quiet guilt that came from wondering if I'd done enough for the people I loved. It was like I was living behind glass. The world could see me, but I couldn't feel the world anymore. And one night, I just said out loud, God, if you're real, I need you to break the glass. No one moved. Even the studio lights seemed frozen in time. The words landed like prayer. He smiled faintly, not at the audience, but at something internal. And he did. Not all at once, not with miracles or fireworks, but in the smallest ways. A stranger on a film crew asking if I was okay. A sunset that felt like it was painted just for me. I started to notice those moments again. The ones that tell you life is still worth showing up for. Oprah exhaled, quietly, a breath that trembled just enough to reveal her emotion. You talk about God like he's close, she said softly. Keanu nodded. He is. I don't see him as a distant force. I see him as someone who sits with you in the dark before you ever find the light. Reverend Ellis whispered, Amen, under his breath, almost inaudible, but somehow it carried. Tyler wiped his cheek, pretending it was sweat, then stared at his screen, realizing he just captured something beyond content. Keanu's tone softened even more. I've had nights where I didn't think I'd wake up okay, where grief felt heavier than breath. But every time, something reminded me that I wasn't forgotten, not famous Keanu Reeves. Just a man who still mattered to someone greater than himself. Oprah tilted her head, her voice shaking slightly. And that's what keeps you moving forward? He nodded. Yeah. Knowing that even when the world sees broken pieces, God still sees a masterpiece in progress. The audience sat completely still, the quiet, now a living thing between them. Keanu's words had crossed from conversation into testimony, and even the cameras seemed to know they were capturing something that would outlive the broadcast. Then, after a long pause, Oprah whispered, That's not a story from the edge, Keanu. That's a story from redemption, he smiled. Maybe they're the same place, just seen from different sides of the light. Oprah adjusted slightly in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her hand resting under her chin as she searched for the right words. The moment felt delicate. It wasn't confrontation she wanted, it was understanding. Her tone softened, stripped of performance. Keanu, she began. We live in a world with so many beliefs, so many voices claiming truth. Don't you ever worry that being certain about your faith could make others feel unseen? The question hung gently between them, not as a challenge, but as a bridge. The audience waited, sensing the shift from testimony to conversation about the wider world. Keanu met her eyes. His voice was calm, without the armor most people used in public debates. I think about that all the time, he said, because I've been the one who felt unseen too. I know what it's like to be dismissed or misunderstood. The thing is, my faith isn't about proving I'm right. It's about learning to love even when I don't understand. Oprah nodded slowly, letting that sink in. He continued, If truth exists, and I believe it does, then my job isn't to use it as a weapon. It's to live it with love. Truth without love is just noise. The audience collectively exhaled, a sound closer to relief than applause. For the first time in the broadcast, everyone seemed aligned in one shared thought. This wasn't about division. It was about something universal. Keanu's tone stayed humble, his words deliberate but unforced. There was a time I thought I had to defend what I believed. But faith isn't a competition. If what I believe is real, it doesn't need me to win arguments. It needs me to live differently. That's harder. It's easy to preach. It's harder to forgive. From her seat near the front, a woman in the audience dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked grateful. Oprah leaned forward, the softness in her gaze returning. "That's not how people usually talk about faith on television," she said gently. Keanu gave a small smile. "That's because television usually needs conflict. But truth, real truth, has enough gravity on its own." The room was silent again. The red lights on the cameras blinked quietly. In the control room, a producer whispered, "Do we even cut to commercial?" Another voice answered, "If we do, the audience will hate us." Back on stage, Oprah rested her hands together and asked, "So how do you hold on to your faith without judging others who believe differently?" Keanu paused, taking his time. "I remind myself that I'm not the standard," he said. "I'm the student." Keanu's words lingered in the quiet, and Oprah let them. The silence didn't feel awkward. It felt alive, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then, softly, she asked, "You've seen the world. You've met people from every culture, every belief system. Don't you ever think that faith might just be perspective, a language people use to reach for the same thing in different ways?" Her tone wasn't sharp. It was almost tender, an honest curiosity from a woman who had spent her life asking unanswerable questions. Keanu smiled gently. "I think you're right about one thing," he said. "We're all reaching. But I also think we're not all reaching for an idea. Some of us are reaching for someone." Oprah blinked, studying him. "Someone? Yeah," he said. "For me, faith isn't a philosophy. It's a relationship. I don't worship a concept. I trust a person. And that changes how I treat people. Because if I'm loved by grace, I don't get to decide who's worthy of it." The audience stirred. A young woman in the front row covered her mouth, moved by something she couldn't quite name. Reverend Ellis nodded once, the kind of nod that meant truth, recognized truth. Oprah leaned closer, her brow furrowed, not in disagreement, but in thought. "But what? About people who don't believe what you believe?" she asked. "The ones who see life through a completely different lens?" Keanu's voice remained calm. "Then, I love them anyway. Because if truth exists, it doesn't make me better, it just makes me responsible. I can't point at people and say, 'You're wrong.' All I can do is point my life and hope they see something good in it." That landed. Not just with Oprah, but with everyone watching. The tension that had been hovering, fear of offense, fear of ideology, dissolved into something purer. "I've failed that a lot," Keanu admitted. "I've let pride get in the way, or hurt feelings, or my own doubts. But every time I mess up, I remember mercy isn't a theory. It's a gift. You can't give what you don't receive first." Oprah's eyes glistened. The words weren't flashy, but they had weight. "You really live that way?" she asked softly. "I try to," he said. "I don't always succeed, but trying matters." In the control room, no one spoke. The switchboard operator, who'd been staring at multiple feeds, finally said what everyone was thinking. "The joke, economy's dead. This is history." Oprah gave a faint smile, sensing the same truth. "You've turned a live broadcast into something we'll be talking about for years," she said quietly. Keanu looked at her kindly. "Not me," he replied. "Just love being louder than laughter for once." The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from conversation to communion. The cameras were still rolling, but it no longer felt like television. It felt like truth being spoken in real time. Oprah glanced briefly toward the audience. Faces once lit by excitement were now softened by reflection. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter and far more meaningful. "I've always believed," Oprah said gently, "that there are many paths to the same mountaintop. That different traditions, different cultures, they're all reaching for the divine, even if they call it by different names." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes warm, unthreatened. "I believe that people are searching," he said, "and I think that search is holy. But I also believe that truth isn't something we invent, it's something we discover. And when we discover it, we're called to live it with humility." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "The danger comes when belief becomes about being right instead of being loving. I don't want to be the guy who wins arguments and loses people. If I believe God is love, then my faith has to look like love, or it isn't faith. A hush swept over the crowd again. A woman in the third row clasped her hands together. Tyler, still clutching his phone, zoomed in unconsciously, his chest tightening as Keanu's words hit something deep inside him that had nothing to do with religion, just honesty. Oprah tilted her head, her tone thoughtful. So, you're saying faith isn't about defending what you believe, it's about demonstrating it? Keanu smiled faintly. Exactly. You can't argue people into love. You can only show them what it looks like. Even the control room, once frantic with directions, was now quiet. The director whispered, "Let it run." The countdown clock on the monitor blinked uselessly. No one dared interrupt. Keanu continued, his voice calm, steady, and alive with conviction. Every day, I wake up and try to point my life, not my finger. I've learned that people don't remember your arguments. They remember your kindness. They remember when you showed up, when you listened, when you didn't walk away. Oprah's eyes softened, the glow of studio light reflecting off unshed tears. That's a rare way to live in a world that rewards performance. Keanu looked at her, that quiet, unassuming humility radiating from every line of his face. Maybe that's why. Love stands out, he said, because everything else fades. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt sacred, as if the set itself was holding its breath. In the audience, Reverend Ellis pressed a hand to his chest and whispered something only God could hear. Tyler stopped recording entirely, afraid that capturing it might somehow diminish it. And then Oprah smiled through the emotion she couldn't quite hide. "You came here to talk about movies," she said softly. "But somehow, we ended up talking about miracles." Keanu's smile deepened. "Maybe they're closer than we think." Oprah sat forward again, her tone shifting from contemplative to curious. "Let me ask you something," she said. "You've played some of the most intense action characters in film history. The fights, the guns, the violence. It's part of what people love about your movies. But you talk about grace, forgiveness, and peace. How do you reconcile those two worlds?" The question wasn't meant to corner him. It was the one everyone in the audience was silently asking. Keanu gave a small nod, as if he'd been expecting it. "I think about that a lot," he said. "Because what I do on screen is pretend. A fight in a movie is choreography. It's a dance between people who trust each other. On set, a punch is a partnership, not an act of anger. But off set, I'd rather hold a door than throw a punch." The crowd responded with a quiet murmur of agreement, recognizing the calm authority behind his words. He continued, "Violence in film can be art, but in life, it's destruction. When I train young stunt performers, I always tell them that strength isn't measured by how hard you hit. It's how much control you have when you could." Oprah smiled faintly. "You teach that?" "I try to," he said. "We talk about safety, about respect, and about consent. Every fight scene starts with agreement: where to grab, where to stop, how to fall. Nobody should ever get hurt for the sake of spectacle. That's not art. That's carelessness." Tyler's camera captured his expression in close-up, the steady sincerity of a man who had seen both sides of human nature. Keanu shifted slightly, his tone softening. "But I haven't always lived up to what I believe. There was a day on set a few years ago when someone on the crew was being disrespected. A lighting tech, just trying to do his job. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause tension. Later that night, it bothered me. I realized silence can hurt too." He paused, the regret visible, but not performative. "The next morning, I apologized to him. Not for what I did, but for what I didn't do. I try to do better now." The audience sat deeply attentive, the silence pulsing like a shared heartbeat. Oprah watched him, then asked softly, "So you've learned to separate the character from the man?" Keanu nodded. "Completely," he said. "When I'm on set, I live in another world. I train, I fight, I take hits, but it's choreography, it's storytelling. It's never about aggression. It's about rhythm, emotion, and meaning. When I step off set, I leave the armor behind. I don't want to carry fiction into the real world. Real life requires gentleness." He smiled faintly. "People sometimes confuse the two. They see me as this action figure who lives in slow motion. But the truth is, offset, I'd rather hold a door open than throw a punch." A light ripple of laughter, warm and respectful, moved through the crowd. Even the control room eased back into breath. Oprah nodded, her voice calm but intrigued. "That's a powerful contrast. Do you ever feel like you have to explain that to people? That violence on screen isn't who you are?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes. But mostly, I just try to live it. People notice consistency more than explanations. That's what I tell the young stunt performers when I work with them. They come in full of energy and ego, ready to prove themselves. And I tell them strength isn't about being feared, it's about being trusted." He leaned slightly forward. "We go over safety first, always. We talk about consent before contact. Every throw, every grab, every move, it's a promise between two people. You don't make it look real by hurting each other. You make it real by caring enough to protect each other." The audience sat motionless. It was clear these weren't rehearsed words. Oprah tilted her head. "That's not just about stunts, is it?" Keanu's eyes softened. "No, that's about life. We all have the power to hurt people, in words, in silence, in neglect. The real strength is choosing not to." Tyler's fingers tightened around his phone. A thought flickered through him about the clip he'd posted last week, mocking a stranger at a diner. The laughter it had earned suddenly felt small. Keanu looked out toward the audience. "I've learned that what we make exciting on screen doesn't have to define what we make sacred in real life." Oprah leaned back slightly, studying him. "You've been in this business for decades," she said. "How do you keep that kind of integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite?" Keanu's expression grew thoughtful. "By remembering that every choice leaves an echo," he said. "Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. We think morality shows up in big, heroic moments, but it's really in how we treat the person, carrying cables or serving coffee. That's the real test." The audience nodded softly, taking in the weight of his simplicity. He continued, "I've done things right, and I've done things wrong. But when I look back, the moments that stay with me aren't the movies or the awards. It's the times I failed to speak up. I remember that more than anything. Because silence protects comfort, not truth." Oprah gave a small, knowing smile. "That sounds like something we all could learn from." Keanu looked down, his voice quiet but certain. "I think we all get chances every day to choose kindness over convenience. It's not about being perfect, it's about being present." The audience erupted into gentle applause, the kind that came from admiration rather than entertainment. Tyler clapped too, slowly, his phone now resting face down on his knee. The realization stung him. He had built an audience online by laughing at other people's mistakes. Now, sitting here, he felt the cost of it. Keanu looked around the studio, one last time, then back to Oprah. "In movies, I act out violence so the audience doesn't have to live it. But in life, I want to live peace so others remember it's possible." Oprah's eyes shimmered with understanding. "And that," she said softly, "is coherence." The room went still again, a quiet harmony settling across every face. The audience had begun to relax again, the air filled with warmth after such deep conversation. Oprah smiled lightly, trying to bring a little levity back into the room. "So," she said with a half smile, "would it be fair to say faith is your superpower?" A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. It wasn't cruel, it was gentle, affectionate. But the timing was fragile, and the laughter felt like a thread stretched too thin across something sacred. Keanu looked at her, then at the audience. His face was calm, his tone kind. "No," he said softly. "Faith isn't my superpower. Faith is where my weakness goes when I cannot stand." The words fell like a quiet bell ringing through the studio. The laughter stopped instantly, as if it had realized it had wandered into the wrong room. You could feel the air change, oxygen seemed to leave the space for a moment. Oprah's smile faded, not from embarrassment, but from understanding. The practiced humor that usually kept her interviews flowing suddenly felt small in the presence of what he'd just said. She tried to chuckle again, just to smooth the silence, but it died halfway through. His calm invited her back into the moment, instead of retreating from it. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet awe, mixed with something reverent. Tyler lowered his phone completely now, eyes wide. Even through a lens, this was beyond what he could package into a clip. Oprah's fingers brushed her lap, almost nervously. Then, she did something rare. She reached up, removed her earpiece, and set it on the arm of her chair. The studio control room buzzed in confusion, voices calling her name through the feed she'd just disconnected. She looked back at Keanu, her eyes steady but softened. "Let's walk through it," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Okay." The room seemed to breathe again, but slower now, like every word from here forward would matter. When Oprah set the earpiece down, it was like lowering a curtain between her and the machinery of television. No cues, no timing, no whispered reminders to pivot or wrap, just presence. She turned toward Keanu fully now, her voice slower, more deliberate. "You said faith is where your weakness goes," she began softly. "Can you tell me what that really means?" Keanu took a breath, his eyes thoughtful. "We live in a world that tells us to hide weakness," he said. "To keep moving, to look strong. But that's not real strength. Faith is where I bring the parts of me that can't hold up anymore. The fear, the guilt, the confusion. It's where I stop pretending I'm enough on my own." A woman in the audience nodded slowly, tears catching the studio light. The soundstage felt smaller now, more intimate, like a church built out of silence. Oprah tilted her head, her voice quiet. "So it's not about confidence?" He smiled gently. "No, confidence is about me. Faith is about trust in something bigger than me. It's where I let go of control." Her eyes glistened. "That's not an easy thing for people to do." Keanu nodded. "No, it's not. Especially when you've spent your life trying to earn worth. But I've learned that worth isn't something you earn. It's something you're given. You just have to stop running long enough to see it." A collective sigh moved through the audience, the kind that happens when truth brushes against something universal. The control room was silent, no one daring to break the rhythm. Oprah's hands clasped together. "I think," she said softly. "I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. You touched something real, and I tried to make it lighter. I think we all do that sometimes." Keanu gave her a kind smile. "That's okay," he said. "Laughter's just another way of breathing. Sometimes it protects us until we're ready to feel." She nodded, her expression tender. "Then maybe," she said, "we're ready now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cameras were still rolling, but no one in the room seemed aware of them anymore. It felt less like an interview and more like a shared confession. Two souls sitting in truth, stripped of titles and applause. Oprah's voice broke the silence first, gentle but trembling. "You said faith is where your weakness goes," she whispered. "I think. I've spent years turning mine into work, into noise, into helping everyone else find meaning, so I didn't have to face how much I needed it myself." Keanu's gaze was steady. "That's not failure," he said softly. "That's survival. We all find our ways to stay standing. But faith, real faith, doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks for honesty." The crowd listened as though hearing something sacred. Tyler blinked through tears he hadn't expected, his phone trembling slightly in his hand before he finally turned it off completely. Reverend Ellis watched the exchange with moist eyes, whispering something that sounded like a prayer of gratitude. Oprah took a slow breath. "I think I've learned something from you today," she said. "That maybe the silence after the laugh is where truth waits." Keanu nodded with a faint smile. "Sometimes laughter brings us to the edge of something deeper. If we're brave enough not to fill the silence, we might finally hear what's been trying to reach us." The studio seemed to inhale with him. The air felt different, lighter, clearer, as though a hidden door had opened somewhere no one could see. Then, Oprah reached across, and touched his hand lightly. "Thank you for letting me walk through that with you," she said. He smiled. "Thank you for not walking past it." The audience exhaled as one. Oprah looked out toward the rows of faces still glowing under the studio lights. Something inside her shifted. She knew this conversation had grown larger than just her and Keanu. It belonged to everyone now. She turned back to the audience, her voice warm and steady. "I think we all feel something right now," she said. "Let's open this moment. I'll take one question from the audience." Hands hesitated in the air, uncertain. Then, from the middle rows, Tyler slowly stood up. His camera phone was tucked away now, forgotten. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. Hi," he said. "My name's Tyler. I came here. Honestly, I came here, hoping to get a few clips for my channel. I wanted laughs, maybe a reaction, but now..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "Now? I don't even know. You said faith is where weakness goes. What if I want that piece, but I don't even know where to start?" The crowd turned to look at him, but not with judgment, only empathy. Oprah smiled gently, then turned to Keanu, silently inviting him to answer. Keanu nodded at Tyler, his gaze kind and fatherly. "You already started," he said softly. "You stood up. You spoke the truth. That's honesty, and that's where faith begins. Not in perfection, not in knowledge, but in honesty. You don't have to have all the answers. Just be real." Tyler nodded, his eyes wet. "But what if I doubt?" Keanu smiled. "Then doubt. God's not allergic to your questions. He's not scared of your mess. He just wants you to talk to him. Start there." The audience murmured quietly, deeply moved. Oprah leaned forward, resting a hand over her heart. "That might be the most comforting thing I've ever heard said about faith," she said softly. Keanu looked back at Tyler. "It's not about earning peace," he said. "It's about asking for it. That's where the door opens." Tyler sank back into his seat, tears rolling down his face, his hands clasped tightly. Together not for content, but for the first prayer he hadn't planned to film. The audience stayed quiet for a long moment after Tyler sat down. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Oprah wiped her eyes discreetly, then turned back to the crowd. "Maybe one more," she said, her voice soft but steady. "There's wisdom in this room. Let's hear another." A hand rose slowly in the second row. Reverend Ellis stood, straightening his posture as his kind eyes met Keanu's. His voice carried a calm authority, gentle but rich with life. "Brother Reeves," he began, "I've been a preacher for 50 years. I've seen belief shouted from pulpits and whispered in hospital rooms. You spoke of living truth without using it to win. How, in a world full of noise and pride, do we live faith quietly without losing its fire?" The question drew a murmur of agreement. Oprah smiled softly, touched by the Reverend's humility. Keanu took a slow breath before answering. "That's a beautiful question," he said, "and I think the answer is small. We live faith in small, faithful acts." He leaned forward, his tone simple and direct. "Remember people's names. Say thank you. Apologize quickly, even when your ego resists it. Keep your promises, especially when no one is watching. And listen, really listen longer than you speak. That's how light grows quietly." The audience sat utterly still. Reverend Ellis nodded once, his eyes glistening. "That's the kind of sermon that doesn't need a pulpit," he said with a smile. Keanu returned the smile. "That's the kind of faith that doesn't need applause." Oprah let the moment breathe. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "That," she said, "might be the most important thing we've heard today. That faith isn't noise. It's presence." Keanu nodded gently. "Exactly. People remember love more than lectures." A few in the audience wiped their eyes. Others simply bowed their heads, lost in quiet reflection. The atmosphere felt less like a talk show and more like a gathering of souls rediscovering what mattered. Oprah's voice softened as she looked around the studio. "That was beautiful," she said quietly, "and I think that's something all of us can carry. The idea that faith isn't just about words, it's about what we do when no one's watching." Keanu nodded, his eyes kind and reflective. "Yeah," he said. "The world doesn't need more speeches. It needs more small acts that mean something. We talk about miracles like they're rare, but sometimes a miracle is just someone remembering your name when you thought you didn't matter." A gentle murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. The camera panned across faces, some smiling softly, others wiping away tears. Oprah turned to the viewers watching from home. "I want to ask everyone something," she said. "You've heard Keanu talk about grace, forgiveness, and small faithfulness. So I'll leave you with this question. What is one small faithful act you can do today for someone who will never pay you back?" The words settled like seeds in the air. The audience listened, moved by the quiet invitation. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm and steady. "That's where the change starts," he said. "Not in the big gestures. It's in the small ones that no one records, no one praises, but they still matter. It's the quiet kindness that keeps the world from collapsing." Tyler looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly. He thought of the man he'd filmed and mocked online, a stranger whose face he'd turned into a punchline. His chest ached with regret, but this time it felt like hope too. Reverend Ellis smiled gently, nodding toward Keanu. "Sometimes," he said, "the sermon doesn't come from the pulpit. It comes from the man who listens." Keanu's eyes glistened. "Then I'm grateful to be that man. Today," he said softly. The audience applauded, not loud, not rushed, but heartfelt. Oprah smiled through her emotion, resting a hand over her heart. "And we," she said, "are grateful you showed up with truth." For the first time that day, the applause didn't feel like performance. It felt like prayer. The studio was still glowing with the quiet after Keanu's words. The audience hadn't moved much since the last applause. It felt like no one wanted to disturb the fragile peace that had filled the space. Then, at the far edge of the stage, a producer stepped forward. His clipboard trembled slightly as he whispered to Oprah, "We need to move on. The next segment's cued." Oprah didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on Keanu, her voice calm but firm. "We will hold," she said simply. The producer froze, unsure if he should retreat or insist. But the authority in her tone made the decision for him. He stepped back slowly, knowing this moment wasn't meant to be timed. Oprah leaned in again, her voice gentler now. "I'm still curious," she said. "You've talked about faith when things get better. But what does it look like when nothing changes? When you pray, and the answer is silence, or the answer is no?" The question drew a low murmur from the crowd. Everyone had felt that ache prayers unanswered. Hope delayed. The energy in the room shifted again, deepened. Keanu's expression softened. He looked down for a brief moment, hands clasped loosely. "That's the real test, isn't it?" he said quietly. "When everything stays the same, when the storm doesn't pass. I think that's when faith shows its truest shape." He paused, searching for the right words, then said, "Sometimes peace is the miracle." The audience fell silent again. No gasp, no applause, just breath, the sound of recognition. Oprah's face changed. Her practiced smile faded into something raw and honest. "Sometimes peace is the miracle," she repeated slowly, as if she needed to feel each syllable. The words didn't sound like a quote. They sounded like a truth she had been waiting to hear for years. From the corner of the set, the producer quietly turned off the countdown clock. No one had to tell him. He knew they weren't measuring time. Anymore, they were measuring meaning. The studio lights hummed softly, casting a warm halo over the two of them. Oprah sat back for a moment, eyes distant, her hand pressed to her heart. The control room waited for her next cue, but there wasn't one. The broadcast had left the script far behind. "Sometimes peace is the miracle," she echoed again, her tone lower, almost reverent. "That might be one of the most powerful things I've ever heard on this stage." Keanu gave a modest smile. "It's something I've had to learn," he said quietly. There were times I prayed for change, real, visible change, and nothing happened. No rescue, no reversal. But over time, I realized that the stillness itself was an answer. That peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of grace inside it. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling. Across the aisle, a man wiped his eyes, embarrassed but unashamed. Oprah's eyes glistened. "So what do you do when you can't fix it?" she asked softly. "When the world doesn't shift the way you hoped?" Keanu's gaze dropped to his hands. "You stay," he said. "You stay with it. With the pain, the uncertainty, the people who don't know what to say. You stop running from what you can't control. Because sometimes, that's where peace is hiding, right inside what you've been trying to escape." The crowd listened with breath held. It didn't feel like television anymore. It felt like confession. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, afraid to break the spell. Oprah's voice was gentle when she spoke again. "You've talked about grace, forgiveness, stillness. What does that look like on your hardest days?" Keanu smiled faintly. "It looks like breathing when I don't want to. It looks like choosing kindness when I feel empty. It looks like not needing the outcome to define the purpose." His words seemed to echo long after he stopped speaking. The producer, standing in the shadows, quietly lowered his clipboard. There was no schedule left to protect, only something sacred unfolding live. The quiet in the room was so deep it almost hummed. Every person there felt it, not tension, but reverence. Oprah wiped a single tear from her cheek, her composure softened by something more human than professionalism. She looked at Keanu for a long moment before saying quietly, "I think you've just described something most of us spend our whole lives chasing." Keanu's voice was gentle. "Maybe that's why we miss it," he said. "Because we expect peace to look like fireworks. But sometimes it's just a still heart, even when the storm hasn't stopped." The words drew a collective breath from the audience. Tyler leaned forward in his chair, his phone completely forgotten, his hands clasped like someone holding something sacred. Oprah's tone deepened. "I've interviewed world leaders, survivors, people who've lost everything," she said. "But I don't think I've ever heard peace described like that. Not as a result, but as the miracle itself." Keanu smiled faintly. "Miracles aren't always loud. Sometimes they're quiet enough to miss if you're waiting for a sign instead of a whisper." A woman in the back row began to cry softly. The sound wasn't disruptive, it was cleansing, like rain on dry soil. Oprah took a slow breath, her voice trembling slightly. "You know, they tried to remind me about the next segment," she said, nodding toward the silent control booth. "But I think this is the segment people were supposed to see." The audience nodded, united in agreement. Keanu looked around the room. "Then, maybe it was meant to happen this way," he said softly. The cameras rolled on in total silence. The countdown clock on the wall blinked 0, then stopped altogether, frozen mid-frame just like the moment it was recording. In that stillness, no one moved. Because they all knew they were witnessing something that didn't belong to television anymore. It belonged to truth. The studio lights dimmed slightly, casting a gentle amber tone over the stage. The air felt different now, intimate, tender, like everyone had come a little closer without moving an inch. Oprah looked at Keanu thoughtfully, her voice lower, as if she didn't want to disturb the fragile peace between them. "I've spent years interviewing people who've gone through loss," she said quietly. "Parents who've lost children, survivors who've lost their homes, people carrying grief that television can't fix. I used to believe that giving them a platform would help them heal, but I learned something over time." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Being seen isn't always the same as being healed." Keanu nodded gently, eyes full of understanding. "You're right," he said softly. "Being seen is not a cure. It is a beginning." The audience fell completely silent. The sentence landed like a soft stone sinking into deep water, quiet, but it rippled through everyone. Oprah blinked, visibly moved. "That's beautifully said," she whispered. Keanu's expression remained humble. "When people are hurting," he continued, They don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need someone to sit with them in the pain, without trying to fix it, without turning it into a message. Just presence. That's what I try to do. Oprah tilted her head slightly. You mean you've lived that way? Keanu hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There's a children's hospital I visit sometimes. No cameras, no headlines. I go because those families already have enough attention from doctors and news stories. They don't need more eyes, they need someone to sit down and say nothing for a while. A murmur moved through the audience, soft and reverent. He continued, you learn a lot when you just sit in silence with a parent holding their child's hand. You see courage that never makes it to the screen. You see love that has nothing to prove. Oprah's voice caught. That kind of stillness, it's rare in this world. Keanu nodded. It's sacred. Because sometimes, when you can't take away pain, just refusing to let someone face it alone becomes an act of faith. Oprah leaned forward slightly, her eyes glistening in the warm studio light. You know, she said softly, I've sat across from hundreds of people telling their stories of grief. And every time, I realize television has limits. We can share their words, we can amplify their strength, but we can't truly carry what they carry. The lights go off, the crew packs up, and their pain is still there. I used to feel helpless about that. Keanu nodded, understanding completely. It's not helplessness, he said gently. It's honesty. None of us can fix another person's pain, but we can stand beside them while they walk through it. He paused, his eyes distant for a moment. When I go to that children's hospital, he said, I see parents who haven't slept in days, but they still smile for their child. I sit quietly in the corner sometimes, not because I have words that can help, but because I want them to know they're not invisible. A tear slipped down Oprah's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. That's one of the most human things I've ever heard, she whispered. Keanu smiled softly. The parents are the heroes, he said. They teach me more about faith than I could ever teach anyone. I've seen fathers reading bedtime stories beside hospital beds, mothers humming lullabies between IV drips. That's faith. Not the kind that moves mountains, but the kind that stays standing when the mountain doesn't move. The audience listened in reverent silence. A few people clasped hands, others bowed their heads. Tyler stared at the stage, realizing that real courage didn't look like fame or followers. It looked like quiet endurance. Oprah took a breath, steadying her voice. You remind me that sometimes love isn't loud, she said. It's the stillness of someone saying, you're not alone. Keanu nodded. That's the kind of love that heals slowly. The kind that doesn't make the news, but it keeps the world alive. Oprah took a long breath, her voice calm but weighted with empathy. You know, she said, in all my years of interviews, I've learned that grief is the one language everyone speaks. Some people use words, some use silence, some use work. But at the heart of it, we all just want to be seen. Keanu nodded, his eyes soft. That's true, he said. We live in a culture that celebrates visibility, but forgets about understanding. Sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who go unseen because we assume they're fine. The audience listened, hushed and attentive. Tyler glanced down, thinking about his mother, the woman who worked double shifts so he could chase his dreams. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually asked how she was. Keanu continued, his tone warm and sincere. I've learned that being seen doesn't mean being fixed. When I visit those hospitals, or even just sit with friends going through something hard, I remind myself I'm not there to save anyone. I'm there to remind them they still matter. Oprah leaned forward, visibly moved. That's something I wish the world understood. People don't need us to solve their pain, they just need us to notice it. Keanu smiled gently. Exactly. You can't heal someone's wound, but you can refuse to let them bleed alone. The audience sat in reverent silence. For a moment, the set felt less like a studio and more like a sanctuary. Then, Keanu turned slightly toward the camera, his tone warm but purposeful. To everyone watching, he said, ask yourself this: Who needs to be seen in your life right now? A friend, a parent, a stranger? Say their first name in the comments and maybe even tell us why you thought of them. Sometimes the smallest act of seeing someone can change everything. Oprah nodded slowly. And maybe, she added softly, that's where healing really begins. Just as the atmosphere in the studio began to settle into reflection, a stagehand quietly approached the edge of the set. He moved carefully, as if not wanting to interrupt the sacred calm that had filled the space. In his hand was an index card. He leaned toward Oprah and whispered something quickly. She listened, nodded once, and took the card. She glanced down at it, her brows lifting slightly. "We're getting something unusual," she said softly, looking toward Keanu. "It seems someone has called into the control room a woman named Marina. She says she used to work with you on a film set years ago." Keanu looked surprised. "Marina?" he asked gently. "What does she do?" Oprah scanned the card. "It says here she was a set medic." Recognition flickered in Keanu's eyes. "Yes," he said. "I remember her." Oprah gestured toward the cameras. "We're live, but I think this is worth it." "She's on the phone now." She pressed her earpiece slightly to listen, her eyes widening as Marina's voice came through the studio speakers, steady, emotional, and full of warmth. "Hi, Oprah." "Hi, Keanu," the voice said. The audience fell silent. "I don't know if you remember this, but years ago I worked with you on a night shoot. One of the grips got a phone call during filming. His wife had just passed away unexpectedly." Everyone froze. The director shut down production. "You stayed long after wrap, just sitting beside him on the curb. You didn't say much, you just stayed. And later, we found out you arranged for him to get counseling through the studio anonymously. He never knew it was you." The crowd gasped softly, not out of shock, but awe. Keanu's head lowered. His voice came quiet, almost a whisper. "I didn't do that for this moment," he said simply. Oprah's eyes filled with tears. The sincerity in his tone, humble, without self-glory, was almost unbearable in its beauty. Marina's voice trembled. "I know," she said. "That's why I wanted to remind the world that kindness can be silent and still change everything." The studio air thickened with emotion. Oprah sat still, holding the index card in her lap as though it carried weight beyond paper. She looked at Keanu, her voice soft and unsteady. "You never mentioned that," she said. Keanu shook his head gently. "Because it wasn't about me," he replied. "That night wasn't a story, it was a person's pain. You don't put that in headlines. You just show up." The audience stayed completely silent. The lights, still bright, somehow felt tender rather than harsh. Oprah blinked slowly, her composure faltering. "You've done so many interviews over the years," she said. "But I don't think I've ever seen someone live the message they talk about the way you do." Keanu looked down at his hands, uncomfortable with the praise. "I don't always get it right," he said quietly. "But I try to make sure people know they're not alone." That grip. He lost the love of his life that night. There wasn't anything to say. Words just feel too small sometimes. All I could do was sit there until he stopped shaking. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Tyler's throat tightened as he watched. The same man who once seemed distant, a movie star untouchable, now felt deeply human, like someone who understood the kind of pain no spotlight could hide. Marina's voice came again, steady but emotional. "You didn't just sit there, Keanu," she said. "You showed the rest of us what compassion looks like in practice. You didn't rush him, you didn't make a speech, you just stayed. That night changed the crew." Keanu swallowed hard, eyes misting. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I don't want to take credit for love. It doesn't belong to me, it passes through all of us. That night was just my turn to hold it for someone else." The audience exhaled, softly, the sound like wind moving through trees. Even Oprah seemed to forget about cameras and audience cues. What had started as a talk show had become something else entirely, a moment of shared grace between strangers and one humble man. Oprah's eyes shimmered beneath the soft glow of the lights. "That's extraordinary," she said, her voice trembling. And you never wanted anyone to know? Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. No, some things lose their meaning when they're seen too loudly. Real kindness doesn't need a stage. The audience stayed completely still. Then, one by one, people began to rise, not in a burst of applause, but in quiet unity. It wasn't about celebration. It was about reverence. Oprah turned to face them, her voice full of emotion. "You all feel it, don't you?" she said softly. "That something just shifted. The laugh I gave earlier, it missed the truth of who you are. And I think I needed to see this." Keanu looked at her kindly. "We all miss it sometimes," he said. "The center of things, the part that matters. But the beautiful thing about grace is it waits for us to notice." Oprah nodded, blinking back tears. "You just gave every person watching a new definition of strength." He smiled, humble as ever. "If it helps someone choose compassion tomorrow, then it's worth it." Then he turned slightly toward the camera. "Has someone's quiet kindness changed your life? Tell that story briefly. Sometimes remembering it brings the light back." The audience stood in total silence, hearts full. Oprah took a moment to compose herself, folding the index card in her lap and setting it aside. The story they had just heard had touched something deep in her. But as a broadcaster, she also knew the world was watching millions of people, each seeing this moment through their own filter. She took a slow breath, then looked at Keanu thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "we've talked about faith, grief, and kindness, and I can't help but wonder, can television really hold a conversation like this without turning it into sides, or headlines, or noise?" The question carried weight. It wasn't cynical, it was weary. Years of seeing deep moments edited into sound bites had left her cautious. Keanu nodded gently. "I think it can," he said. "But it depends on us, on how we watch, how we listen. We don't need more winners and losers. We need more neighbors." The audience murmured softly in agreement. The phrase landed like a simple truth that somehow felt revolutionary. Oprah smiled faintly. "More neighbors," she repeated. "That sounds simple, but right now, it almost sounds radical." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his tone warm but steady. "The problem isn't that people disagree," he said. "It's that we've forgotten how to stay at the table when they do. Real conversation doesn't need a verdict, it just needs patience." Oprah's expression softened. "That's not easy," she said. "No," Keanu agreed. "But peace never is. It's something we build, one small bridge at a time." He paused, looking out toward the audience. "Here's something I try to do," he said. "Once a week, I invite someone to coffee whose life is nothing like mine. Someone who sees the world differently. I don't go to convince them of anything. I just ask about their story." A gentle murmur moved through the crowd, half curiosity, half inspiration. Oprah nodded slowly, her eyes bright. "And you listen," she said, softly. Keanu smiled. "Exactly. Just listen." Because when you understand someone's story, it's harder to turn them into an enemy. The words lingered between them like a soft echo. When you understand someone's story, it's harder to turn them into an enemy. Oprah took a slow breath, visibly moved. "That's powerful," she said quietly. "But it's also countercultural. We live in a world where outrage gets attention and division sells. How do we hold space for this kind of conversation when the world keeps pulling us toward extremes?" Keanu's face softened with understanding. "Maybe we start by choosing smaller circles," he said. "You can't fix the whole world, but you can make your corner of it kinder. Invite people in who make you uncomfortable, not to debate, but to understand. We've forgotten the art of curiosity." The audience nodded, visibly engaged. A woman near the front murmured, "Yes," under her breath. Keanu smiled faintly. "Curiosity is the antidote to fear," he continued. "If you can sit across from someone whose life looks nothing like yours and say, 'Tell me what matters to you,' you've already begun healing something bigger than politics." Oprah leaned forward, the light catching in her eyes. "So what would that look like, practically?" Keanu hesitated for a moment, then said, "Here's what I do. Once a week, I meet someone whose story I don't understand. Maybe a veteran, a refugee, a teenager trying to find their way. We grab coffee, and I ask only one thing. Tell me about your life. Not my opinion, not my take, just their truth." The audience murmured again, deeply affected by the simplicity of it. Oprah nodded slowly, her tone reflective. "That's something anyone could do," she said. "That's the point," Keanu replied. "Healing doesn't start in governments or conferences. It starts over coffee, across small tables, where people decide to listen instead of perform." The crowd was silent, but alive with thought. In the control room, a technician looked at the live viewer count climbing steadily and whispered, "It's still going up. They're watching the whole thing." Another replied quietly, "Of course they are. It's real." Oprah glanced toward the audience, her voice carrying a warmth that blended gratitude and awe. "You know, Keanu, I think that's what people crave most: real conversations. Ones that don't end with a winner or loser. Just two people trying to see each other." Keanu nodded. "Exactly. We keep asking how to fix society, but maybe the answer is smaller than we think. If every person chose one other person to really listen, we'd be living in a different world within a year." The audience erupted in soft applause, not for drama, but agreement. Oprah's eyes flicked toward the control booth, where monitors showed viewership numbers rising. One producer whispered in disbelief, "We've never seen engagement this high during a serious segment." Another replied, "It's because they feel it. They're not just watching, they're part of it." Back on stage, Oprah turned to Keanu again. "You've reminded us of something so simple, yet so lost. That empathy isn't a broadcast, it's a habit." Keanu smiled gently. "Yeah, a habit we have to keep choosing, every day." In the third row, Tyler turned and caught sight of Reverend Ellis 2 rows behind him. The older man's kind eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, unspoken but strong. Tyler made a quiet decision. He would reach out after the show. Maybe they'd get that coffee Keanu talked about. The lights dimmed slightly as Oprah closed her notebook. "You've given us more than a conversation today," she said. "You've given us a model." Keanu looked around the room, his voice soft. "Maybe this is what media was meant for, not to divide stories, but to share them." The audience rose to their feet, not roaring, not clapping wildly, but standing together in quiet unity. The applause from the last moment faded slowly, not with noise but with quiet reverence. Oprah sat still, her eyes lowered for a beat before lifting them back to Keanu. The room was calm, every heart tuned to the same quiet rhythm. "Keanu," she said softly, "we've talked about faith, kindness, listening, but I want to ask you something that I ask everyone who sits here. What do you want your legacy to be?" The question hung between them. It was one of those Oprah questions, simple, direct, but carrying a weight that could silence a crowd. Keanu leaned back slightly, thoughtful, his gaze unfocused for a moment as if searching through memories before answering. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but each word landed with intention. "I don't think about legacy much," he said. "Maybe because legacy feels like something people say when they want to be remembered. I'm not sure that's the goal. I just want to love God, love people, and keep showing up when there's nothing to gain." The audience stirred, touched by the humility in his tone. Oprah smiled faintly, her eyes soft. "That's it?" she asked. He nodded. "That's it. I don't need statues or headlines. I think the truest measure of a life is whether you made it easier for someone else to breathe. Whether you showed up for people when it wasn't convenient." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Tyler exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath. The idea of showing up when there's nothing to gain felt like an answer he hadn't known he was looking for. Oprah studied him for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a beautiful answer," she said, "and maybe the rarest one." Keanu smiled gently. "It's not rare," he said. "It's just quiet. Quiet things don't trend, but they last." The words hung there, still and luminous, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Oprah leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, but curious. You know, I've asked that question to hundreds of people. Most talk about what they want to build, what they want to leave behind. You're the first to talk about showing up. Keanu smiled softly, his expression serene. That's because most of what we leave behind isn't built, it's carried, he said. By people we've touched. By moments that mattered more than we realized at the time. I don't think anyone remembers our accomplishments as much as they remember how we made them feel safe. The audience was silent again, soaking in every word. Oprah's eyes glistened as she listened, clearly moved. That's true, she said quietly. I think about my own journey, how many times people showed up for me when I didn't even know how much I needed it. That's legacy too, isn't it? Keanu nodded. Exactly. It's not about ownership. It's about overflow. You pour into others, and they keep it going long after you're gone. That's how light keeps traveling. His words filled the air like a soft melody. Even the crew seemed transfixed. One camera operator lowered his hand slightly, realizing his own tears might blur the lens. Oprah smiled, a warmth spreading across her face. And yet you speak about it without telling people what to do, she said. You never preach, you just witness. Keanu looked at her gently. That's all any of us can really do. I can't prescribe a path for anyone. I can only share where mine has led me and hope it helps someone else find theirs. A long pause followed. Then Oprah nodded, almost reverently. You've held your ground without pushing anyone down, she said softly. That's rare in our time. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. I'm not sure it's rare, Oprah. I just think kindness doesn't advertise, but it's everywhere if you look closely enough. The audience breathed out as one, the truth of it settling in their hearts like something they'd known all along, but had finally remembered. Oprah sat quietly, visibly emotional now. The depth of the exchange had stripped away the usual polish of television. For once, she wasn't performing, she was participating. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. You know, after all these years, I thought I had heard every kind of answer to that question. But you've made me think differently about what legacy means. Keanu looked at her, his tone gentle but unwavering. Legacy isn't what the world says about you after you're gone, he said. It's what continues quietly in the people you touched. If love keeps moving through them, then the work is still alive. Oprah smiled faintly, blinking away tears. That's going to stay with me, she whispered. He nodded. Me too, he said softly. For a moment, no one moved. The audience was silent, not out of restraint, but out of reverence. The conversation had reached a kind of sacred stillness, the kind that didn't need music or applause to end. Oprah turned toward the camera, her expression calm and full of gratitude. I've sat in this chair for decades, she said slowly. But today, I didn't just interview, I learned. And I think we all did. The crowd exhaled together, as though waking from a shared dream. Some smiled, some cried. The applause that finally rose was soft but endless. Not for entertainment, but for truth. And as Keanu bowed his head slightly, his words seemed to echo in every heart. Love God, love people, keep showing up. The red light above the camera went dark, but no one moved. The audience stayed seated, as if rising would break something sacred that had just been built in the air. The studio, moments ago full of hums and laughter, felt still, reverent. Oprah exhaled slowly and turned to Keanu. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for what you said, but for how you said it. Keanu smiled, his tone calm and kind. Thank you for letting it be real. They sat there for another long moment, not speaking, just sharing the quiet. Then Oprah looked at him again. You know, she said, I think today reminded me why I started doing this. Not to fill time, but to fill something deeper. Keanu nodded gently. Curiosity keeps us human, he said. When we stop asking questions, we stop growing. That line lingered like a warm echo in the studio. The The producers watched from the shadows, unsure whether to move or to just let the moment breathe. Keanu rose first, shaking Oprah's hand with quiet gratitude. "This was good," he said simply. "Thank you for walking through it." As he stepped down from the stage, crew members instinctively made room for him. He thanked each one by name, a gesture that seemed to carry more weight than applause. In the third row, Tyler turned to Reverend Ellis. "I came here for laughs," he admitted, "but I think I just got something I needed more." Ellis smiled, his weathered face kind. "The best laughter comes after truth," he said. "It lasts longer." Tyler hesitated, then added, "Would you maybe want to grab coffee after church? Not to debate or anything. I just want to listen." The old reverend nodded, eyes bright. "I'd like that very much, son." Around them, the studio began to stir again, though softer now, as if everyone understood that the noise needed to return gradually. A few people whispered to each other, others simply sat still, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Up on the stage, a boom operator removed his headset, wiping his eyes discreetly. He pulled out his phone and texted his sister, "Watch Oprah tonight. It's not what you think. You'll understand." In a break room halfway across the city, a woman in a nurse's uniform leaned against a vending machine, catching the tail end of the segment on a small television. She didn't know who Keanu Reeves really was, not beyond the movies. But when she heard his words, "Peace is the miracle," she felt something loosen in her chest. She set down her coffee and turned the volume up. Somewhere in a suburban kitchen, a mother called to her teenage son doing homework in the next room. "Hey, come here for a second. You should see this." He groaned at first, then came to stand beside her. They watched together in silence. Backstage, Oprah sat in her dressing room, staring at her discarded earpiece. It lay next to a stack of cue cards she hadn't needed. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but full. She reached for her notebook, the one she kept for moments that changed her perspective, and wrote a single line: "Walk through the doorway next time." Across the hall, Keanu moved slowly down the corridor, still in his black suit. The crew parted gently as he passed. Each person he met, he thanked by name. The cameraman, the floor manager, the makeup artist, who had stayed late. No speech, no grand gesture, just small acknowledgments that made people feel seen. At the end of the hallway, he paused, looked back at the glowing exit sign, and smiled faintly before stepping into the cool Los Angeles night. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. The studio doors closed behind Keanu, but the ripple of what had just happened continued inside. Oprah stayed seated for several minutes, listening to the faint echo of her own thoughts. There was no applause sign now, no countdown, no control room voices, just stillness. She reached for her notebook again, tracing the words she had written. "Walk through the doorway next time." Then she added another line beneath it. "Ask more, assume less." It was a reminder not just for interviews, but for life itself. Across the city, viewers carried their own fragments of the moment. Tyler and Reverend Ellis walked out together into the California dusk, their silhouettes blending in the amber light of the parking lot. Tyler glanced at the older man and smiled. "You were right," he said. "It wasn't about answers, it was about hearing something real." Ellis chuckled softly. "That's where faith begins, son, in listening." As they parted, the hum of traffic felt different, less noise, more rhythm. And somewhere beyond them, Keanu Reeves slipped into the ordinary night unnoticed, his black boots tapping against the pavement. For him, there was no afterglow, no need for headlines, just peace. This story is about humility in a world obsessed with noise, about conviction without contempt, and about the surprising power of a gentle answer when the world expects an argument. If you believe kindness can be strong, subscribe and stay with us. If this moment reminded you that grace is still possible, share this video with someone who needs peace more than proof. Before you go, think about this. What is one belief that helps you stand when life gets heavy? And which conversation should Keanu have next on this channel, and why? Your voice keeps this story alive.